you're a diabetic and you want to know about fasting, this is probably one of the most comprehensive videos that you can get as a diabetic for fasting. I'm going to dispel a lot of myths. I'm going to jump in and let you know what it is that you need to do, what some of the misconceptions are with fasting so that you have a clear direction and you feel confident, more confident than when you first walked in for this video on fasting for diabetes, fasting to lose body weight, fasting to preserve muscle. Man, I feel like I'm doing a little bit of a dance move over here, but I'm just going to go with it. At this point, I just feel like I'm just caught in a rhythm. If it's your first time on the channel, I'm a diabetic fitness coach. I help diabetics to build muscle, burn body fat, control their blood sugars. But if you're not a diabetic, but you just like the content, you want to know more about supplements to help you improve your health, your overall fitness, your lifestyle, or you just want to see some of my lifestyle, appreciate you, go ahead, smash that subscribe button, hit that bell notification so you guys don't miss out, and hit that like button. It just helps a video like this get out there and just reach more people. Appreciate you guys. Let's just dive right in. I want to start this off with an award that a woman by the name of Dr. Barbara Corky, who in 2011 was a Banting Medal winner from Boston University. The Banting Medal is the most prestigious scientific award that is given by the American Diabetes Association for some of her achievements in scientific discovery or papers, for example. And her lecture in 2011 was called Hyperinsulinemia is the root cause of insulin resistance, obesity, and diabetes. All right, I'm going to start this talk off with that. I'm going to show you guys how my client lost 20 pounds in 7 days. First thing I want to say, guys, is this was about my client. This was about 5 years ago. And the crazy thing is I don't have the progress photos of what she looked like. And I wish I took the progress photos. It was literally a one-off. She randomly messaged me and said, Jay, I want to do a 7-day fast. I'm like, sure, let's do it. I'm going to support that because I've always preached about fasting. And so I wanted her to do it. We actually ended up cutting it off at 5 days. And when we cut it off at 5 days, we slowly brought food back into our diet. So started off with a little bit of soup. Then we moved to having some veggies on the plate with a little bit of rice and some chicken, for example, or a little bit of rice and some beans and some tofu, balance out the plant-based options. And then over time, very fast, she was able to just get back up to normal. She actually lost about 20 pounds in the 7 days. And sure, some of that, what was regained was about 5 to about 7 pounds. After that, but in terms of 7 days of being able to dive into the body fat and burn that, after about 20 hours to about 36 hours, depending on the person, your body's gonna start to burn up a lot of body fat. And so you can see her dragging that out to 5 days. She really dove in, burned out a lot of body fat in a short period of time. Again, body fat is just used as energy. So you're not starving if you got body fat on board. I think fasting is just going a prolonged period of time where you are not consuming any food. Essentially, the goal with fasting is to get yourself to a point where we're manipulating the body's hormones in a way that's going to make it easier for you to burn body fat specifically, lose weight specifically, and make sure we improve things like insulin sensitivity and reduce insulin resistance. Now, when you do this, whether you're a type 1 and type 2 diabetic or you're not a diabetic at all, this fasting is powerful for anyone who wants to lose weight and improve insulin sensitivity. The whole goal of fasting is to lower insulin levels. When we lower insulin levels, we change the hormonal output of the body in terms of what's happening. You cannot burn body fat and also burn glucose. Typically, the body is going to pick one or the other. This has been demonstrated through what's called the Randall cycle. And a lot of times the Randall cycle explains why there might be a miscommunication when it comes, why there might be some misunderstanding when it comes to people that might consume a little bit of a higher fat diet. They have healthy fats and their fats are up. There's a misconception that and they have the carbohydrates low because they're trying not to spike insulin. This does tie into fasting, so stick with me for 1 second. So if you're somebody that's on a lower carb, you're higher healthy fats, the body itself, when you have more lower carbs, is going to switch to burning more body fat and using that for energy. Now, if somebody comes off of eating a lot of more fats and less carbohydrates, and they now go into eating carbohydrates, the body has to switch gears to eat, consuming and burning more glucose. And during that period of time, that cycle, when you switch over, that can make it look like there's insulin resistance due to eating more fat than carbohydrates. But all it is the system is switching over. Over time, your body will go back to baseline and you won't have what looks like insulin resistance. I wanted to bring that up just in case anyone thought that eating higher fats, especially the healthy fats, are necessarily bad for you, because that's not necessarily the case. And what that also shows us is in the absence of glucose, the body is going to switch gears to use fat and burn that for fuel. The problem a lot of people are facing is in our society today, a lot of people's cells are filled up with too much glucose. That glucose gets converted to glycogen. Now, in the liver does a lot to store carbohydrates as glycogen. What it also does through a process of de novo lipogenesis is going to convert glucose, stored glucose, into body fat. Now, usually this starts to ramp up when all the glycogen stores are full. Glycogen stores, where your cells are converting glucose into glycogen to store for later usage. Now, in the liver, once those stores are full, because there's a capacity limit to that. Almost imagine yourself going to a club. There's a capacity limit to how many people could get inside that club before they're at max capacity. Same thing with the liver. There's a max capacity to how much glucose, but there is no max capacity to how much fat your body can accumulate. So what the body does, because we don't want to accumulate too much fat in our organs, because that just increases insulin resistance. Insulin resistance means more insulin in the body, which means the body is going to push itself to gaining more unwanted weight and can lead to obesity. And so what ends up happening is the body, especially in the liver, through the de novo lipogenesis, will convert the glucose into body fat and ship it out of the organ and store it in more body fat sites. Think about around your stomach now. We start developing more of a gut. The issue that we have is that a lot of times to get rid of this body fat, a lot of people might go and exercise. But when you exercise, as you know, you eat a donut, you've got 50 calories there to 100 calories there, maybe 150. You work out for an hour and you're doing cardio, you're burning 150 calories. There's already something kind of off to how hard you have to work to offset what you just ate. And so what ends up happening, a lot of people will do a lot of exercise, they'll run themselves into the ground and go low calorie. And the problem with that is that you're just burning up the excess glucose in the body's system. You're not really ever depleting those glycogen stores as much as you can to slow down the acceleration of the body fat that's being created through de novo lipogenesis. We see how calories and exercise might not be the best option to really get past the plateau and dive into burning body fat. Remember, in the absence of glucose, the body is going to look to burning fat for fuel. So if you do something like fasting, you're going to go through an extended period of time where you've already spent time burning up the glucose. The only thing left is the energy your body can use. And remember, fat, stored body fat is energy. It's calories for the body. You're not starving yourself. Your body is eating the stored energy in the form of calories from fat. Some of the benefits of fasting right off the bat, it's going to improve things like apoptosis, autophagy. Apoptosis is just clearing out the damaged, worn out parts of a cell to allow it to function better. Autophagy is programmed cell death, so it allows cells that are no longer functioning right to get rid of themselves in a sense, so new cells can be formed to help your body in the future to function better for you, right? To ramp the metabolism up. And there's a lot of studies that show this as well, is that when you're on a calorie diet, typically you're gonna see a slowdown in the metabolism at some point. Even if we're looking at insulin sensitivity, initially you're gonna improve insulin sensitivity on a caloric diet because you're lowering insulin levels as well, but at some point it's gonna plateau. Whereas fasting, because of the hormonal response of fasting is going to trigger an increase of things like growth hormone, an increase of things like adrenaline, norepinephrine. It's going to allow your metabolism to stay boosted up to blow past a lot of those plateaus that typically happen with people that are low calorie. You know how powerful it can be to preserve muscle, and it preserves more muscle because of the boost in growth hormone, which preserves our muscle tissue, which is great for ramping the metabolism up long term to help to burn body fat as well. Whereas in a caloric deficit, what's going to end up happening is it's not preserving it at the capacity that fasting would help you do. There's a lot of misconceptions with diabetes, especially, is the difference between ketoacidosis and ketogenesis. When we look at diabetic ketoacidosis, because people might say don't fast because you're a diabetic. Well, a lot of times we have to peel back the layers. What do you mean don't fast because you're a diabetic? A diabetic, if we're talking about type 1s, don't produce any insulin. And so that's, okay, we understand that base and the foundation, don't produce any insulin, so they're more likely, if they do give themselves injections, to potentially go into a low blood sugar. If they start to dip a little bit, just have a little bit of juice, no insulin, and your body essentially, potentially, could still stay in a fasted state because you're not manipulating the hormones still with insulin. So if you go a little hypoglycemic, try having 15 grams of juice to bring it back up. And now if you go high, sure, when you inject the insulin, it's likely going to offset the fast, but at the same time, that's the only worry you have a little bit of insulin, and then you can keep riding out your fast, even though it might take you off of your fast slightly because you've injected that hormone insulin that we're trying to keep low during a fast. But there's no difference in the problem that you would face whether you're fasted or not fasted when it comes to high and low blood sugars, how you would manage them outside of a fast is the same way that you would manage them during a fast if they were to happen. Now, the other issue is you have diabetic ketoacidosis. That is when a diabetic, let's say you first diagnosed, your blood sugars are chronically high for a long period of time, your body is going to break down muscle tissue, proteins very rapidly, and your body's going to produce ketones from that breakdown, right? Especially when it's breaking down body fat. We're talking about breaking down body fat as well as protein and muscle tissue in a very short period of time and damaging the body due to high blood sugar levels, which is known as glucotoxicity. Now, glucotoxicity of high blood sugars and just going without eating and fasting, keeping insulin levels low is completely different. When you're fasting, what is released is the ketones from the fat that is being broken down and used for energy and fuel, not your muscle tissue and your protein. As remember, growth hormone gets spiked, which preserves muscle. If anything, you're preserving more muscle in the fast than you are when you stay chronically low calorie for too long. The other important thing to note that we don't talk about a lot is the issue of hyperinsulinemia or high insulin levels in the body. Now, a lot of times if we eat certain foods over time that are higher glycemic index, you think of things like desserts, cakes, things that have sugar in them, anything that really has processed sugar in it, or anything that has sugar in it, cakes, desserts, you're looking at packaged food items that have been heavily processed. Likely those foods that come in a package and have been heavily processed are going to cause your blood sugar to spike a lot. When that blood sugar spikes, and a lot of these foods are likely going to be more higher glycemic type foods, meaning that they're going to spike the blood sugar a lot faster. This requires more insulin if you inject to bring your sugar levels down from that. Now, if somebody has a chronically high level of insulin because they're constantly eating foods that are spiking blood sugars and they need chronically high levels of insulin, then over time, hyperinsulinemia can lead to insulin resistance and weight gain. Now, when we see that chronically high levels of insulinemia that lead to insulin resistance, think about the boy who cried wolf. At some point, people stop listening to the guy who cried wolf because they're like, there's no wolf. We don't want to pay attention. So when a wolf does show up, nobody's paying attention. The same thing applies to insulin and biological systems. If you're constantly pumping a high level of something and it's staying up here, the body's just not going to respond in the same way. In a sense, things like insulin resistance are a defense mechanism for the body. If you remember, when your liver has to convert a lot of that glucose that's being pumped into the body, has to convert that glucose into glycogen, which then accelerates the creation of body fat, which we know too much body fat is bad for the liver, which we know can cause what's called non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, right? Which is terrible for the body. Then the body is going to have these defense mechanisms. Insulin resistance just says, hey, I'm not going to let as much sugar in because I don't want to keep accelerating this fat growth process that's now stapling itself on the liver and other organs like the pancreas, just leading to more insulin resistance, more insulin, more weight gain. And it becomes a vicious cycle that goes around in a circle. And so a defense mechanism is obesity. A defense mechanism of the body is insulin resistance, because the body is trying to say, hey, we need to tone it down a little bit because of what's happening. It's not necessarily that receptors are damaged or there's anything wrong with the insulin. The body itself has already filled its capacity of glycogen, and so the acceleration of the body fat inside the organs is something that your body never really wants. And so as a result, it might leave you a little bit more insulin resistant during some times, just to, as a defense mechanism again, to stop more glucose from getting inside of your body cells. Again, it makes it harder when your cells are already packed full of glycogen and glucose. Think about it like this, because a lot of people might say that insulin, that glucose, it's a problem with the receptors and glucose can't get into the body cells. Now remember, somebody who is insulin resistant, take a type 2 diabetic who's extremely insulin resistant, and they start to gain body weight. They start to gain body weight, start to get obese. Now the issue that you're seeing there is an acceleration of de novo lipogenesis. De novo lipogenesis, which means the creation of body fat, comes from glucose, right? So we're saying that the glucose gets inside the cell. That's what causes the acceleration of de novo lipogenesis. So if it was really a problem with the receptor, there's no way that much glucose will be able to get inside the cell. There's no way that much body fat would be able to get created through de novo lipogenesis. But we know that there's an acceleration of de novo lipogenesis within the cell. So it's not a problem with the glucose getting into the cell. There's too much. that's leading to the toxicity in the body. That's leading to the high insulin levels. And high insulin levels over time, whether you're on the far end of the spectrum of severe insulin resistance or you're on the lower end of the spectrum of a little bit of insulin resistance, at some point it's just a defense mechanism because the body is starting to get stuffed full of a little too much glycogen, a little too much glucose, and then it becomes more of a challenge to get the glucose into the body's cells because you're already packed out. And the same thing applies again to type 1 diabetes. If you notice, when we talk about hyperinsulinemia, studies are showing us that people that are on insulin pumps can gain an average of 10 pounds more versus people who are on injections. Now, if you look at the constant stream of insulin that gets pumped with somebody that's on an insulin pump throughout the day, sure, it's supposed to simulate what a pancreas does, but it doesn't 100% simulate exactly what a pancreas does. So when people look at the hyperinsulinemia caused by an insulin pump and notice the weight gain that happens a lot of times around the midsection, we start to think, that relates a lot to what you see on the hallmarks of what's called metabolic syndrome. Metabolic syndrome is a list of symptoms that all usually come from the same causation. Now you look at things like an increased gut and waistline, abdominal fat. You also look at maybe there's hypertension or high blood pressure. You could also look at cardiovascular implications and risks. That usually you might see that with a lot of type 2 diabetics, but even in type 1 diabetics where you start to see that there's this increase in abdominal obesity, weight gain that happens when you transition to something like an insulin pump, then you start noticing those things and you see that when we root it back, the causation of higher insulin levels, constant streams could potentially be leading to those issues. When you overlap these ideas, you can see how, from one perspective, they can be very, very similar. Even though the causation of type 1 and type 2 diabetes is completely different, you can see the overlap of hyperinsulinemia and weight gain and insulin resistance. So now that we know the cause of that, the obvious solution is to stop eating. That's the very simple thing that someone can do. But unfortunately, we live in a society where if you tell someone to stop eating, there's implications to that based on the stigma that comes with not eating enough. And so now society is going to tell you, oh, why are you going to starve yourself? Starvation mode. It's the irony about starvation mode is you actually bypass starvation mode by starving yourself. And what I mean by that is you bypass the slowing down of the metabolism, you bypass the breaking down of muscle tissue when you go to prolonged periods of time when you are fasting. If anything, it is more beneficial for the body than even a caloric deficit dragged out for a long period of time. So again, Occam's razor. You guys ever heard of Occam's razor? Occam's razor says usually the most simplest of assumptions is the correct one. And you have all this glycogen that's filling up our body cells now, converting that into body fat, causing more insulin resistance, becomes a vicious cycle now because now the body needs more insulin, which causes more insulin resistance, which causes more body weight, and need more insulin now because there's more insulin resistance, more body weight. It's a never-ending cycle. And so in order to get out of that, when you fast, your body is now going to bypass the glucose, going to get into the glycogen, going to burn that up, and then burn the body fat so that you can start to lose the body weight. So a lot of times what people will also do is they'll fast for too low periods of time. Some people need a 7-day fast. Some people need a 24-hour alternate day fast. Some people need a 36-hour fast 2 to 3 times a week. Now, the trick is to finding exactly what's going to work specifically for you. What I also highly suggest and recommend is that when you are eating, you're eating quality foods. You're getting good nutrients in on those days that you are eating. You think about, more lower glycemic index foods. Try to have a set amount of calories that you're reaching for in the day so you can structure what that weekly total caloric goal looks like. So it's not like you're completely deficient in nutrients when you are eating. Also, on the days that you have a lot more food on board, I would recommend training. Go and strength train to build muscle. Do a little bit of cardio, for example, for your system, just for overall health. And that way you can still maintain a workout regime. You can still maintain getting the right amount of nutrients and calories in. But if anything, now that you're fasting, you're saving time. You ain't got to eat nothing. You're saving money. You're saving your energy. All you're doing now is just letting your body take care of and heal itself. And that essentially is the power of fasting. Find what works for you and what you feel comfortable with, but also understand the knowledge behind it. Everyone's body is slightly different in terms of what they feel, in terms of what they don't feel. Do what works for you, man. I'm just letting you know how powerful fasting can be for certain people. And if it's something that you want to try, you could always start off low. You could always start off with 16 hours, see how you feel. Then push to 24 hours, then push to 36 hours. Try a 48-hour, but also have it make sense for your goals. Have it make sense for what you're going through, and then put that forward.